What's up, YouTube? This is Boxing Way. Please subscribe to the channel. I wanted to give you guys a quick breakdown of this great fight this week, and I think this is gonna end up really being a great fight. I think the styles match up perfectly between these two. Anthony Kakachi is gonna be defending his IBO strap. He's no longer the IBF champion, so that title would not be on the line for this fight. I thought it was, but I just checked and I found out that he's currently he dropped the title. So this is just going to be for the IBO. It's not going to be for a major world title. He's going to be facing off against Lee Wood, who's going to be moving up from 126 up to 130 to challenge him. Okay. Um, Lee Wood, Anthony, both 36 years of age. Okay. Both of them had recent wins against Josh Warrington. Wood has been out the game since 2023, though. He hasn't fought since October of 2023 when he beat Warrington at featherweight. All right, Anthony Kakachi beat him up at 130 last year. Okay, so he's been a little bit more active. He fought twice last year when he pulled off the upset against Joe Cordina, who was undefeated at the time. And then he went on to fight Josh Warrington after, right? I went back and watched some good ass fights preparing for this video. I went back and I started with the Lee Wood fight and against Mike Conlan, which was a classic. I mean, that was an incredible, incredible fight. And you know, one thing I realized with Lee Wood, and I've become a big fan of him over the years since that Conlan win because I wasn't really familiar with him before that fight. But since that fight, I've been following him, and he's made me some money in some big fights. And I actually was able to meet him last year at the Fabio Worley Frazier Clark fight. I was sitting directly behind him. I don't know if he's gonna remember, but he was real, real cool. But I become a fan of him because there's always drama in his fights. There's always something. He's getting knocked down. He's coming back. You know, he can box good, but then he ends up getting lured in these wars, and you know, it's just like he's just a fun fighter to watch. And Kakachi, who I recently got familiar with because I wasn't familiar with him until he beat Joe Cordina, you know, who I was following at the time. And when he stopped him, it was just such a big deal. I did do a breakdown for the fight, but I wasn't familiar with Kakachi until that fight. So I started going back, watching some of his older stuff, and I actually picked against him for that fight because I wasn't expecting the KO because of the KO, you know, ratio was kind of low and everything. So um, this is gonna be a good fight because I think that you know, when I think of Lee Wood, I'm thinking like he can box good. He, you know, has good speed. He has good power. You know, um, but then he gets into these wars. You know what I mean? And he's been stopped twice in his three losses. He's been stopped twice. One recently to Mauricio Lara in a fight that he was clearly winning. He just made a mistake, got caught with a big left hook, and got stopped. You know, they stopped the fight. And after rewatching it, I know there was some controversy behind that stoppage because the towel was thrown in. But when I rewatched it, and I remember rewatching it back then, I thought the stoppage was a good stoppage. Like he didn't really have his legs underneath him and stuff. But they rematched it, and he ended up beating Mauricio Lara, and I believe Lara popped 30. Like the results came out after, so he just like he completely outboxed him in the second fight, dropped him and everything. But he always gets into these dramatic fights, right? It's never like an easy go. Even when he beat Josh Warrington and he stopped him midway through the fight, you know, he was getting busted up in that fight. You know, so it's never like a smooth sailing fight with Lee Wood. It's always drama. All the fights are always good, and they have been at least for as long as I've been watching them. You know what I'm saying? So, big fan of his. Anthony Kakachi. Um, he's just volume, volume, volume. 36 years old, but he looks like a young 23-year-old when he fights. I mean, that Joe Cordina fight, the amount of punches he was just throwing and just not getting tired. You know what I mean? He was landing some big shots on Cordina, and it was like, you know, it was one thing when a fighter swarms you and, you know, you cover up, you tie up, you do whatever. Like Kakachi didn't stop throwing, and the punches didn't seem like they were. It didn't look at any point where he was punching himself out. And I was watching a fight, rewatching it again today, and I'm like, damn, this guy is throwing like he's like violent. And I think that when I think of this fight, I think Lee Wood, he would have to play it smart like he did in a Lara rematch, right? If he's going to win the fight, he would have to play it smart. I think, I just think he's been there. And I think that even if he's in trouble, I think he's been hurt, he's been down, and he's still won fights. And I think he would do better than Joe because when Joe got hurt against Kakachi, he really didn't really have the experience of surviving. You know what I mean? He didn't really know what to do. And Kakachi was just hurting him continuously. Whereas I think Lee Wood, when I seen him down against Colin, when I've seen him hurt and buzzed in other fights, it just seemed like he had the experience to survive. It's just that with Wood, he does tend to, you know, I think he's kind of a sucker for left hooks. That's where he lost against Lara. You know what I mean? I think sometimes when he goes into the exchanges, that's where he's at his weakest point. But that's what won him the Colin fight too. So I don't want to sit here and say, you got to be careful in the exchanges because he came back in that fight and stopped him and knocked him out of the ring in the 12th round by being a dog in the second half of that fight. Colin was doing a great job fighting as a southpaw, winging that left hook, feinting low and looping it up high. And Wood, who, is a righty, he would always parry down and he will always fall for the feints. And he has to be very careful. Because I know Kakachi is not a southpaw, but Kakachi is very tricky with that right hand. You know what I mean? Um, and I think if it does turn into a war, I favor Kakachi in that type of fight. If Wood can keep the distance, you know, throw behind a jab, right, and use his legs like he did in a Lara rematch. If he can keep that pace going, because even in a Warrington fight with Kakachi, Kakachi was being aggressive, but Warrington used a lot of movement. You know what I mean? So Kakachi couldn't really get to him. I think Kakachi did well against Cordina because he was kind of stationary. Once Kakachi got to him, Joe didn't know what to do. He couldn't get back out of range because Kakachi would just close the distance so quickly, and he's excellent on the inside. And Wood can handle himself on the inside too. But I think the strength of Kakachi is where it's at and on the inside. You know what I mean? He could fight on the outside too. He can box. I seen him against was it Woodstock? I think it was a fight. It was one of the earlier fights I said, yeah, Leon Woodstock, where he was kind of like fighting on the back foot, and he can box on the back foot. So I'm not saying he can't, but I think when it comes to these two, it really depends a lot on Lee Wood, in my opinion, because Lee Wood can do both, but he gets into these slugfests, and if he gets to a point where now he is inactive, it's been a year and a half since he's been in the ring. Plus, this is his first time going up to 130. So when I seen the weigh in, I was like, okay, they look at equal size. Like they're listed. I think Kakachi's 5'10 and Lee Wood is 5'7. They're like around the same height, But as far as size, I really don't know how they're gonna look in the ring that night. You know what I mean? Kakachi could come in looking a little bit bigger than Wood, but Wood has pretty good power too. You know what I mean? So you can't sleep on Wood's power. You know what I mean? So it's a tough fight to call. I really think it can go either way. I do think Wood can possibly have the power to, if not hurt Kakachi, but at least get Kakachi to respect him. You know, I definitely think Kakachi has the power and the volume to break Wood down if he chooses to slug it out. One thing about Wood usually is a slow starter. You know what I mean? He usually struggles early in the fight. The longer the fight goes, and I'm not counting the Lara first fight, but the longer the fight goes, normally he's improving. You know what I mean? Normally he's figuring out his opponent, and normally that's where he's the most dangerous. He was more dangerous against Warrington. He was more dangerous against Conlon. All right, but Kakachi to me, if this fight turns into a slugfest, and I think for him, he needs to start fast. He needs to come at Wood quickly because Wood gets cut early, he goes down early, and he needs to keep that momentum going. I know Wood normally grows stronger, but if Kakachi can jump on a guy that's been inactive all this time and keep that momentum going, then I think he can definitely control the fight for as long as he wants if he can keep that momentum going and start early. He should definitely start early. Wood, on the other hand, I think he needs to be more cautious in the earlier rounds and let the fight go on. Use your movement, fight smart, be defensive because he has leaky defense. You know what I mean? Um, the way I look at it, um, I didn't decide yet where I'm going. I know FanDuel didn't have the fight available to bet on. As a fan, if I feel, and I'm gonna be honest, I feel Wood is gonna find a way to win, and that's just the bias side of me. Logically, though, I think stylistically, I think Kakachi should win. You know what I mean? Kakachi should win the fight because he is the true featherweight, or super featherweight. Um, he's been more active this past year. The volume, and I just think he's the better slugger, slightly. But I always bet towards Wood normally because he always find a way to pull it out. And I think if he boxes good, keep Kakachi on the end of his jab and follow it up with that right hand or uppercut, as Kakachi tries to be aggressive and walk him down, I can see him definitely winning on points from just being a better boxer. You know what I mean? But logically, I think if I'm telling you guys, I think Kakashi should win the fight. He should win. But I'm gonna probably I'm gonna find what app I could bet on. I'm gonna put my money on Wood because he's always came through for me, almost always, except the Lara fight, the first one. But he's been coming through for me for the last few years and stuff. So anyway, it should be a fun fight. I did tweet it this morning. I said this might end up mess around being like one of the best fights of the year. And I'm not just saying that I have no reason to hype this fight. I just think the styles really match up really well to bring us a good fight. You know what I mean? Because Lee Wood, he tends to slug it out. Kakachi slugs it out. And I think we're just in a good momentum right now. Like I know last weekend sucked until we got Inoue in that Sunday fight. But that ended up the Inoue fight ended up being one of the best fights of the year. The Conor Ben fight, which was 2 weeks before that, 2 weeks before was a good fight. And I think that this fight it might end up being like another great fight. So I'm not gonna be able to go live this weekend or next weekend. I'm sorry, but definitely watch the fight. I'll definitely be doing a recap. All right. I'm gonna put my money on Wood when I get a chance, probably straight up. Um, maybe on points. I'll probably lead towards points. I didn't check. I don't know, but at some point I might put my money on him as a fan. But Kakachi, logically, he should be the winner of this for the reasons I stated. All right. Anyway, y'all have a good weekend. I will see you guys soon. Peace.